Let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
Are an open culture that
it's actually
in the importance of
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed?
Welcome to In the Clouds. I am your host, Stu Miniman, and it's hard to believe this is the final episode for 2022. Thank you so much for joining us. Really happy to welcome back to the program, actually the person that hired me into Red Hat, and he was the inaugural guest for this program back when Chris Short was running it. So it's been since September 10th of 2020 was the last time he was on this program, but anybody in Red Hat likely knows him, but for the rest of the audience, I'm happy to welcome back to the program Joe Fernandes, Vice President and General Manager of the Hybrid Platforms Cloud Group here at Red Hat. Joe, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Stu. It's always great to be on, and that's an awesome opening. I think you got the best opening of all the streams, so very cool.
Yeah, I do love our creative team. I love they do the little intro there, and it's great timing. You know, for those that were watching, we are looking to have our new CIO on the program. Hopefully, we'll get him rescheduled in January. But I'm actually really happy that we got to have Joe on the program because we hit an important anniversary last week. It's actually 10 years of OpenShift, and who better than Joe to be on the program? You know, Joe was the first product manager for the product. He's seen it all there from day one, you know, came in to help drive, this business of Red Hat going deeper into the cloud. So yeah, Joe, if you could, with that little setup for our audience, give us a little bit about, yourself and especially, what you've been up to the last 2 years.
Yeah, thanks, Stu. As you mentioned, I've been with Red Hat. It'll be actually 12 years in January. I came here to work on platform as a service and our cloud solutions more generally and so forth. And as you said, we hit a key milestone. So 10 years ago this month, I was feverishly working on the first commercial release of OpenShift, the OpenShift Enterprise 1.0 release. So past couple of years, after sort of building out the product management org, I now run the OpenShift business, and it's actually part of the broader hybrid platforms business here at Red Hat, which includes the rest of our cloud and virtualization portfolio, as well as our middleware runtimes.
So Joe, we popped in the comments for those that are watching. You did a great blog, worked with the team, and went through it. I remember talking to Red Hat, back when OpenShift first came out, and yeah, it was open source, but boy, there were a bunch of things that, I remember from kind of the Solaris days or, some of the things that were put together because 10 years ago, we weren't talking Docker. We weren't talking Kubernetes. It was, cartridges and a bunch of these other technologies that, I'm not a Linux person, Joe. So like some of the things to me was a little hard to wrap my head around it. Obviously, the move to Kubernetes was a really big bet, one that, you and I have talked about a number of times, back when I was doing theCUBE. Help us, live us through a little bit of that 10 years, some of the key decision points, pivot points that you and the team made to help make sure that we are actually still talking about OpenShift and it's relevant 10 years later.
Yeah, sure. Again, I'll try not to rehash the entire blog here, but a few key things that stood out for me, or that I'll always remember. First, if you go back 10 years, PaaS was still a relatively new concept. Heroku was out, Google App Engine when that was Google started out in PaaS, Engine Yard. Those PaaS solutions that had been on the market and were really getting a lot of popularity with developers. But the challenge is, a lot of enterprise organizations couldn't consume those, right? And the main thing was because they had a lot of applications that just couldn't move to the public cloud. So they liked the agility, they liked the model, and wanted to bring that to their developers, but they couldn't do that. And that's sort of where OpenShift was born. Was can we take this really great new application development model, and can we bring it to enterprises in a way that they can consume which means hybrid, right? In a hybrid cloud manner, which is, our mantra, right? Something that you could run in the public cloud for apps that could run there, but could also run in your data center or really anywhere you wanted and so forth. And that was the premise behind the very first release of OpenShift. And, turns out we weren't the only one that had the same idea. Cloud Foundry, which was launched around the same time, was attacking the very same problem. But really, something that was OpenShift was rooted in this notion of the hybrid cloud, and certainly, as has been Red Hat's history, rooted in open source. So I think that was sort of the first key thing is really seeing how important that was to our customers. We did develop that organically. Also had done a small acquisition at the time. What ended up taking hold was the organically developed code, and that's where I really started learning more about containers, right? So the code that we had developed for OpenShift here at Red Hat was actually based on Linux containers, probably 3-4 years before Docker was a thing, right? So it was based on RHEL container technology, application sandboxes, and so forth. And it turned out when we brought that out to enterprises, they really liked that, right? The efficiency of that model and the ability to manage all the compute in a pool and then issue quota against that pool in the form of containers, rather than what most folks were doing at the time, which is giving developers individual VMs or multiple VMs and then trying to manage and patch and update that. That was really key. So that really kind of struck me as, this is like a much more efficient and agile way to get the compute to those developers that need it, but then being able to manage it at scale and securely. Then ultimately, when Docker came out, that's the last point I'll write out. It wasn't so much about containers technology. We were already doing containers technology. What Docker showed was there's a much better way to package content to run in containers, right? And engaging with developers, you always know they always want the next runtime, either the next version of something that they're already using, or something new. I remember when Node.js first came out, we didn't have it in OpenShift. We're trying to figure out how to get that packaged in. We were working with a number of ISVs. When Docker came out, it was so easy to package content to run in containers, different runtimes, different databases, and so forth, that people just instantly started building images, posting them up to Docker Hub, and we knew we needed to get that content. That's what really drove the pivot to around OpenShift 3, was the need to get more content to our application developers and to our customers. What the developers didn't tell me at the time is, in bringing that container packaging format and runtime into OpenShift, we'd end up rewriting all of OpenShift. That subsequently led to talking to Google, getting introduced to Kubernetes, and really at this point, Kubernetes is sort of the brains of OpenShift, right? Kubernetes ended up being even more important than the container runtime at the end of the day. But that's kind of where it all sort of started, right? So the notion of hybrid cloud, the power of containers from an efficiency and agility standpoint, and then the importance of getting those capabilities that developers wanted in the time frame they wanted it, which is what drove us to Docker and ultimately to Kubernetes today. And so cover a lot more detail around that in the blog, but those things really stand out.
Yeah, Joe, it's interesting when you look at such a fast-moving space that this solution set plays in. It's pretty easy for a single technology to get left behind. There's a certain leadership principle I used to talk about. It's have strong beliefs, but loosely held around any specific technology. To be honest, like Joe, I was at the first DockerCon, and that same week there was a Cloud Foundry Summit, and I remember talking to a couple of the principals on that team and being like, "Hey, this is pretty important," and they kind of pushed it off and like, we know better. Well, containers, sure, it's good and everything, but they kind of put it as a sidecar and a second-class citizen. And I look at Red Hat. All the technologies come from communities, and it's a tough balance as to how much do you have an opinionated architecture versus how much do you have to be flexible to take into whatever tool some developer wants. So how have we made sure that OpenShift, that's a tightrope that you have to balance as to give people what they need, but give them flexibility. And, some new project could come out next week, and can we integrate that in and give a bridge to, some future technology that fits into this space?
Yeah, it's a great point, Stu. You know, one of both the benefits and drawbacks of PaaS was the opinions that it held, right? Like platform as a service, whether it was in the form of Heroku or Cloud Foundry or what have you, OpenShift, was highly opinionated, right? In terms of the types of applications you could run, the way you could deploy them and manage them and so forth. And it works great if the apps you're building fit those opinions, and not so great if what you have can't run there, right? And so we sometimes refer to the 12-factor model, the 12-factor app model. Awesome model for new cloud native applications. But again, if you had existing applications or applications that were new but didn't quite fit that model, they became a set of 12 opinions that maybe ruled you out from running things in a Heroku or a Cloud Foundry and so forth. So again, even pre-Kube, pre-Docker, we were a little bit more flexible. We did allow things like stateful services to run on OpenShift. You could bring the things like databases and other messaging products and so queues and so forth into containers, but kind of the pivot to OpenShift 3, where we sort of rebuilt the product around the standard container runtime and Kubernetes, really upped the ante in terms of making it a lot more flexible, right? Like now anything that you could package in a Linux container, and it was much easier to do that, could run on the platform. And then Kubernetes had models for attaching storage and health checks and scaling and so forth that you could really apply. And then we kept pushing the envelope on that with technologies like operators and CRDs and so forth. So that's become really important, because what you see today is it's not just cloud native apps that people are running in OpenShift and Kubernetes. It's not just stateless apps. It's a whole wide assortment of applications and technologies, and it's quite powerful to enable organizations to do that.
Yeah, it's so important. As you said, in the PaaS world, there were certain limits as to what could live on it, and how you could actually take advantage of some of the underlying capabilities. There was that general discussion is like, oh well, if you're doing something across lots of clouds, you end up with least common denominator, and you don't want that. Last week, Amazon reInvent happened. Oh, there's another 100 announcements. Cool. Can that be used with the services that I'm using? Well, most of them should be able to be used. That's really important. There was a recent analyst report I saw that talked about just the spectrum of applications and how, what do you create brand new and what do you, refactor or modernize? And it actually showed, it said like, well, Kubernetes does pretty well, but OpenShift, which is built on Kubernetes, actually has an even wider viewpoint, because we can pull in virtual machines using the KubeVirt OpenShift virtualization, and we work well with the cloud. So even on both ends of the spectrum, OpenShift is even more open than just Kubernetes by itself. Is that, Joe? I guess let's talk a little bit about where we are today. Where OpenShift plays, and any key results you can share.
Yeah, sure. So totally agree with what you're saying. Right? Again, coming from our background in PaaS and application platforms, we always set out to build sort of the most comprehensive application platform that we could provide, but certainly building it around powerful standards and again, Kubernetes and what Docker evolved to, which is the OCI standard for container runtime and image formats. Those are sort of the core standards that OpenShift is built on. So if you're just looking to run containers on a Kubernetes platform, you can do that, right? OpenShift was actually one of the first commercial Kubernetes platforms. It's fully certified and Kubernetes compliant. You can leverage it directly from kubectl or kube APIs. You can do that. But then around that core, we've built a whole lot of useful capabilities for doing things like building your applications, managing your applications, doing CI, doing CD, doing monitoring, logging, all those other things that kind of come with, application development and application management, that, if you're doing it on your own or leveraging other services, you may have to sort of piece together yourself, whether you're piecing together in the public cloud by consuming different cloud services, or if you're doing it, you're building your own from the community bit, you'd have to go find those pieces of software. So that was really our goal. Is OpenShift is a cloud native application platform built around this Kubernetes core. And that's sort of kind of carried us through today. So where we are today, again, cloud has only grown exponentially since we started 10 years ago, right? So the percentage of our customers that are running OpenShift in the public cloud much higher than what it was in the past, and with that demand for cloud services, right? People don't want to bring their own software and self-manage it in the public cloud. So we offer OpenShift as a fully managed cloud service in partnership with Amazon, which we talked about last week on Red Hat OpenShift on AWS, also in partnership with Azure on the Azure cloud with Azure OpenShift, in partnership with IBM, and then we also have a Google-based offering as well. But again, these are large enterprises. A lot of our customers, they're accelerating their move to the cloud, but they still have applications that they need to run in their data center. We've seen it's still vSphere or VM-based deployments are still dominate, but a lot of growth in OpenShift on bare metal environments, particularly for performance sensitive or latency sensitive applications, but also in general to reduce costs. And then, as things have grown in the public cloud, more multi-cloud deployments, more customers that are taking OpenShift and saying, I'm not just going to run it on Amazon, I also need to run it on Azure. I also run it on Google, right? So as you get more and more deployments in the cloud, more customers that we see have multi-cloud strategies, have multi-vendor arrangements, and the ability to provide that consistency wherever we run has been great. From a business perspective, we now have thousands of customers, some of the largest clients in the world. So some really great success stories. A few of them were featured at KubeCon in terms of, I think we had sessions with Ford, with ING, with Lockheed Martin, and so forth at our OpenShift Commons gathering. So really proud of the customer base that we built and the stories about the really cool things that they're doing with our platform. So that's sort of where we are today. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome, Joe. And, that maturation, I think about, one of the customer stories that was told at reInvent was Boston University. And I remember talking to Boston University about a partnership that they had with Red Hat around like OpenStack, the mass open cloud. And you look at where they are today, and they're using Red Hat OpenShift service on AWS with the data science offering to do like learning as a service. So, as the Red Hat portfolio has matured, Boston University is one of those customers that has matured along with them. Joe, one of the areas you've really helped educate me on is that application portfolio that customers have. I remember an early conversation you and I had when I first joined. We talked about the migration from Unix to Linux and how that all went. And when I look at the cloud, Joe, we're sitting at, somewhere 20 to 25% of applications are in the cloud. When we look out the next 5 years, where are customers with that overall journey? When you talk multi-cloud even, we're still very early with any applications that would actually span across clouds. Usually it's an app here using a data service there, sometimes running transactions in a public cloud, but have my data still stored in the data center. So that modernization of the application portfolio that we as an industry as a whole are doing, what's your view on it? And, where does our group fit in that overall, modernization discussion?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And I know this is something I've probably hammered with you many times, right? And we've worked together on this, is really helping folks understand what we mean when we say hybrid cloud, right? Hybrid cloud certainly is about the hybrid cloud infrastructure that we see customers running on. And I mentioned you still have customers running in the data center, running in the public cloud, across multiple clouds, and even out at the edge where Kubernetes and containers in constrained edge environments is growing more and more popular. And we have customers across multiple verticals either doing that or looking into doing that and so forth. So that's certainly key, because it's really hard to manage this sort of diverse infrastructure when you have applications running in all these different places. But what's even harder is that the fact that the applications themselves are even more diverse than the infrastructure that they run on, right? So yeah, Kubernetes is a great platform for cloud native apps, right? If you're building a cloud native app today and you're not running it in containers, you're not managing it with Kube, you're probably an outlier, right? And so forth. You're not necessarily building a new microservice and looking to deploy it in a VM, right? But that still represents only a small percentage of applications that large enterprises have. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 20%, but it's certainly nowhere near 100% or even 50%. So what else do they have, right? Well, they have a lot of traditional applications, legacy applications, if you will, whether they're N-tier applications, Java, EE, .NET, whatever, older C++ applications running on the mainframe. So we're focusing a lot on, what's the modernization strategy for those applications? How can we help bring those applications into a cloud native environment? And sometimes that means, refactoring those applications to be more cloud native. Some of them may lend themselves to replatforming and getting some benefits from a containerized environment. But that's certainly a big focus of ours is, not necessarily just can we help customers bring more applications to the public cloud, but, starting with can we help them make those applications take advantage of cloud native capabilities regardless of where they may run. On the other side, then you see sort of continued explosion in data and folks trying to get a lot more insights out of that data through whether it's analytics, now AI, and machine learning, and the various frameworks. So that's another big area of investment of ours. You mentioned OpenShift Data Science, which is our newest cloud service. Also, soon will be available for self-managed software distribution for helping organizations like Boston University do, help work data scientists work with Jupyter notebooks or build out MLOps-based pipelines and so forth. So that's key. But even just core enablement of Kubernetes itself, making it work well with GPU-enabled infrastructure, with optimization at the container runtime level. That's something that we've been kind of quite focused on. And then lastly, working with all the various ISVs. Right. Recently, I've spent a lot of time with some ISVs in the telecommunications vertical, but each vertical has their own set of both horizontal ISVs and then ISVs that are specific to that vertical. And many of them are moving their solutions to containerized deployment models, and that's how they're delivering those solutions to their customers. They want to take advantage of hybrid-based deployments and the capabilities of Kubernetes, and so doing a lot of work there as well, right? So the enterprise world is not entirely or even mostly cloud native from an application standpoint, and if we can help customers realize some of the benefits of these cloud native solutions while working across these different types of applications, I think that's even more important than just helping them run across the various infrastructures that they need to manage.
Yeah, Joe, and I'm so glad you mentioned the ISV ecosystem because I also had a couple of those meetings in the last week too, and so important. It's not something that every company needs help on this. So Red Hat, we're part of this ecosystem. We've helped enable, a huge growth in the container and Kubernetes space for, hundreds of software providers to be able to package and manage their software to help customers with their modernization. And then all of our channel and go-to-market partners, so the GSIs and smaller and regional companies that help with that overall transformation, because this is really the big work that I think the industry as a whole is going to be doing for the next 5 to 10 years. Speaking of the future, Joe, let's shift a little bit forward. What are some of the bets that the team's making architecturally today that we should be looking at for the next couple of years to really drive what we expect to see in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so we expect to see, and what we've been working towards is just kind of an expansion of the hybrid cloud architecture, as I mentioned. One of the things I alluded to was edge, right? So we are seeing more deployments at the edge, and one of the advantage I always tell customers, one of the big advantages that Red Hat has is we don't know everything that you're going to run in all these different footprints, but we're pretty sure Linux is going to run there, right? So whether it's in your data center, in the public cloud, or out at the edge, it's very likely that you're running these solutions on Linux, and if you're doing that, then likely these days you're thinking about packaging that as a Linux container, and from a delivery standpoint, and then managing that with Kubernetes if you're doing containers at scale. And so that's a lot of what we're doing. We've shrunk OpenShift down to 3-node and even single node edge deployments for edge servers, and we've worked with some of our partners, our customers on that. And then we saw demand to go even smaller, to go into the device world, so gateways and IoT devices, and so Microshift, which that's the upstream project we announced at KubeCon as Red Hat Device Edge. That'll be the commercial product name. Is really about bringing containers and Kubernetes into from the edge server world into the edge device world. And there's a great session. I highly recommend. Maybe you can put it in the show notes. The Lockheed Martin session at the OpenShift Commons gathering, where they talked about an embedded use case around aerial drones, running Microshift so that they could deploy models to those drones. And again, AI and edge really go together, right? The need to move the processing of the data and the analytics and AI that the machine learning models that you want to run against that data closer to where that data is sourced is driving these deployments. So I think that's a big kind of deal for us, is doing that, and then so expect that to grow. Also expect us to do a lot more in some of these application areas like data science, like AI, machine learning, and so forth. We're also looking at newer models, things like WASM, and what's that going to mean for container platforms? Is that a separate platform? Is that something that you can bring in to an existing environment like Kubernetes? That's a big deal for us. And then lastly, if you look at the cloud native ecosystem, and Mike Barrett on my team has a great chart that he uses, I've started adopting. You look at the rate of change in the Kubernetes repository. It's gone down, from 2016 to today. There's a lot less change in Kubernetes itself, and that's a good thing. That means Kubernetes is getting more stable and getting more sort of focused around stabilizing that core. But then what's taken its place is the hundreds of cloud native projects that have sprouted around Kubernetes and in that cloud native ecosystem. Many of those projects are projects that we're involved in that sort of really add value to a container or Kubernetes-based environment. Things like Tecton, Argo CD for GitOps, things like Istio and all the new work they're doing there on ambient mesh and what have you, serverless and so forth. So there's just so much innovation happening in the cloud native community that it's really sort of exceeded the innovation that we saw just in Kubernetes itself over the past 5-6 years. So super excited about that and the new solutions that will enable for our customers and what it means for kind of the cloud native community as a whole, even beyond Red Hat.
Yeah, Joe, so you talked a bit about the edge, but we had a question. Manish actually asked about how's OpenShift helping the telecommunications industry specifically. I know there's a lot of work the team's done over the last few years, and that's basically a 5G rollout.
Yeah, so we've been through the last few generations. So RHEL, or our Linux, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, has been used in telecommunication deployments since the early days of RHEL. But really, with 4G, there was this move to virtualize network functions, right? Bringing network functions from physical deployments to virtual. And that's really impacted our OpenStack solution area heavily. And we did a lot of work with OpenStack in 4G deployments. Now with 5G, we're seeing telecommunication companies adopt cloud native network functions, essentially adopting containers technology, Kubernetes technology for managing, their network functions, and that includes network functions like, vRAN, right? And that's also where it intersects with edge, right? So when you're doing a vRAN deployment, you're not deploying it in the cloud or in the data center. You're deploying it out at your cell tower locations, right? And those are all over the world, right? And so OpenShift at the edge for telcos, means being able to deal with those types of workloads, and then being able to not only manage them, but being able to sort of deal with all the nuances that it takes to run them, whether it's device accelerators, or whether it's high-speed networking capabilities and getting dual networking and things like that working well in Kubernetes. And then from the operations side, how do you deal with these distributed edge deployments where you don't have SREs, you have, hardware that rolls off a truck and then gets plugged in, and it just needs to work, right? So we did a lot of work around zero touch provisioning, around sort of automation around our bare metal deployments and so forth to make that seamless. So that's where specific to telco and 5G, where we see OpenShift, and this is the solution there is single node OpenShift for a lot of these customers. That's sort of where we've seen that have an impact.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And yeah, just a comment I'll make is I know when talking to you and talking to Mike Barrett, what's interesting, we have such a diversity of our customer base, all of the clouds we live in, and there's some customers that'll be like, hey, that edge stuff is great, but my industry is not there. But the learnings that we have and the changes that we make architecturally do ripple through what we're doing. Or, in the cloud, I know I talked to some of our SREs and they're like, oh, we found something in cloud A and we could actually fix or optimize something and it works in cloud B and C much better now too. So it's kind of the viewpoint that Red Hat has and where we live across these environments do give us an advantage that's unique.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, OpenShift, Kubernetes in general, it's very horizontal, right? It applies to a lot of different verticals, but you do, encounter specific challenges as you work with individual customers, whether it's telco or financial services or retailers or governments and so forth. So a lot of that is unique, but then you start to find a lot of commonalities, like I mentioned, right? So the work we did around edge for telco, minimizing the size of the platform, being able to manage it at that scale, now applies to other verticals. I mentioned Lockheed and government, right? So the work applied directly to our government or public sector customers, and then even if you're not doing edge deployments, being able to manage lots of Kubernetes instances at scale just made our multi-cluster management capabilities better. So advanced cluster management, ACM, which is how we manage clusters, both OpenShift clusters and non-OpenShift clusters as part of our portfolio, is critical for edge-based deployments, but it's critical for all deployments because we see customers running more and more OpenShift clusters, Kubernetes clusters, whether it's at the edge in their data centers or in any of the public clouds. And so, yeah, you start to see a lot of common challenges. And then it's great to see that the investments that we're making in one particular area ripple through and benefit customers in other areas as well.
All right. So I want to expand our aperture a little bit and talk a little bit about the cloud market in general, Joe. So when you look at the growth that we have seen in the cloud marketplace, it's been amazing. Just the huge growth. Amazon after how many years is still growing at 30%, but the last time we had a global downturn was really before we entered the cloud era. Last week at reInvent, I heard AWS CEO Adam Slipsky say, if you want to save money, AWS is the place to do it, which has never been the pitch, for people that really understood cloud. It's I don't go to cloud to save. I either go to cloud for innovation and to accelerate developers and, take advantage of things. But, the cloud is not a, oh, you're going to save 20, 30, 50% versus what you were doing in the data center. There might be cases of that, but it's different. So I guess, Joe, I know you're doing 2023 planning. You look at, the economic impact that we're having. What do you look at the cloud marketplace overall? What happens if, these companies that are putting billions of dollars in a year to grow out their cloud footprint in more countries and more regions, if the economy slows down a little bit, what are you seeing? What are your thoughts there about, the hyperscalers?
Yeah, so I think, if you went into public cloud, much like when folks went into virtualization before that, right? If you went into that thinking, this is a way for me to save costs, what you quickly realize is that the benefits of the agility and the capabilities that, to provide self-service and really, get your developers going quickly, much more important than just, the bottom line cost savings, right? Because it generated revenue on the top line, right? And I expect that to continue, but certainly as we move into a more difficult economic climate, or some would say we're already in that climate, people do focus on costs, and I'd say it's not just the cost of the infrastructure; it's also the cost of putting all these pieces together, right? I think one of the things that folks noted from AWS last week is it wasn't just about announcing a bunch of new services. It was a lot of announcements around how to integrate different services and use them more easily together. And that's certainly what we've tried to do with our cloud services, with OpenShift on AWS, OpenShift on Azure. We're basically trying to put together, as I mentioned earlier, an integrated application platform, so you don't have to do that work, right? Because that also costs money, right? If you're having to consume all these different services and then on top of that, figure out how to make that all work together so that you can get your job done, that takes time, that takes money, and so I'd expect, that certainly created opportunities for us and for other vendors like us. I also expect the cloud providers to sort of continue to evolve their thinking in terms of how can they put all these hundreds of services that they've deployed over the last decade together in more meaningful ways to deliver solutions to their customers. I'd say beyond that too, we want to make sure that customers can leverage cloud innovation wherever it happens to run, right? So whether that's on AWS, whether it's on Azure, on Google, on IBM Cloud, on Oracle Cloud, customers shouldn't be limited in terms of where they run or where they can access innovation, right? Any application that runs in OpenShift doesn't run exclusively in OpenShift. It's consuming other services, whether it's cloud services or services in your own premises. And so we want to make sure that we're always easy to sort of run in that manner, because you may be running a mix of both cloud infrastructure and higher level cloud services from different providers. We expect that to continue. So how can you do that in sort of a cost-effective way? And then aspects of that, the final thing I say is, a lot of interest in just trying to understand cost, right? It's always been a struggle for folks is how do they kind of do cost management and really understand how much they're spending, who's spending it within a large enterprise organization, how to account for that, and really manage that over time. And again, that becomes even more important when money gets tighter and so forth. So we're trying to do more work there around providing insights into customers' cloud environments and help them sort of manage their costs and manage sort of their rollout and so forth. But I still think we're in the early days. I think you mentioned maybe 20%, 30% of enterprise applications actually run in the cloud. I think many more will when we talk, this time next year, over the next few years. But we saw that, again, going back to Red Hat's history, we saw that same evolution, when we first introduced Linux to enterprise data centers, right? Where it was sort of the new thing, and now it's like the de facto thing, right? Like that's what folks are running there and so forth. We expect the same thing with public cloud, the same thing with containers and cloud native environments like OpenShift and so forth. And yeah, so I think a lot more innovation is coming, even though right now I think folks are also much more focused on their bottom line expenditures.
Yeah, lots of great points there, Joe. Yeah, as you said, there's a certain stability that we've reached. Some would say even we're reaching a certain commoditization of that baseline of Kubernetes itself. Sometimes it's not a bad thing if at KubeCon we're like, the Kubernetes piece is boring. That show, I used to always say, it's KubeCon and Cloud Native Con. It should be the Cloud Native piece that we're really talking and driving. Kubernetes absolutely was what got the buzz and the interest in a lot of people there, but there's so much innovation and change still happening. So I guess, yeah, Joe, final question I have for you. As we turn to 2023, you personally, what's got you excited? What are you looking forward to as we look to turn the calendar page?
First, I'm looking forward to taking some time off at the end of the year. I think we all are. Red Hat has always been great. We do an end of year shutdown and recharging, spending time with family. That's first and foremost. But yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing getting out there and engaging directly with customers. This has been a great year in terms of a reopening, but I think there's still some, the events and the customer visit and things like that aren't quite back to where they're used to, right? So engaging with humans and particularly engaging with other Red Hatters and with our Red Hat customers is something that I'm certainly excited about. And then also excited to see, where that next wave of innovation comes from. And I think when you look at some of the downturns, whether it was 2008 or like the .com boom bust cycle, a lot of new innovation is born from these challenging economic times as people look to new ways of doing things, to whether it's to be more efficient or to explore new opportunities. And so I think we're going to see a lot of innovation, even though again the economic climate has certainly taken a turn and become more challenging. I think there's going to be a lot of new innovations that come out of that, and I'm excited to see where that goes from an open source and a community perspective, as well as working with customers and partners on kind of getting their thoughts and so forth. So that's what I'm looking forward to, and hopefully everybody else is excited for the new year as well.
Yeah, Joe, that's awesome. Yeah, and for the audience, it's never too soon. If you mark your calendars, in May of 2023, Red Hat Summit is going to be back in Boston. We'll be back to more of the size and a lot more session to get in some of those really technical sessions that I know people know and expect to come from Red Hat Summit. Joe and I, both being local to Boston, love when people are coming here, and we also have our briefing center. So I've loved talking to more customers. Yeah, I've been traveling some and doing a little bit of speaking, and it's great to see the people in person. But yeah, Joe, it feels a little bit more like the cadence and what we expected. So thank you so much for joining. Definitely, if you haven't already, everybody out there, give a read to the blog post that Joe put up there. And as always, we love your feedback. Red Hat always engage with the community, and appreciate everybody's commentary. And for this show, we'll be back in January, looking to keep our regular bi-weekly cadence. We've got not only Red Hat people, we'll probably do some forward-looking things with some thought leaders in the cloud space. If you have suggestions on topics or people, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm really easy to find through social media and the like. So with that, we're going to put an exclamation point on In the Clouds for 2022. Joe Fernandes, thank you so much for joining us. And congratulations to everybody at Red Hat for the 10 years of OpenShift. I've been thrilled to be part of it directly for the last 2 years, and looking forward to lots more in the coming time. So I'm Stu Miniman, and thank you as always for joining us on your journey in the clouds. We'll see you in 2023.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.